Okay, we're going to start reviewing for the AP exam today. We have finished chapters 2 through 27, and so we are ready to go with reviewing for the exam. So we're going to do this by unit for the most part, and so we're going to start with Unit 1, but I want to go over the breakdown of the test again. I've told you this before, but I'm going to tell you it again because it's getting close. So, first of all, the test is a Thursday afternoon test, all right? I believe that there is another exam that morning that some of you guys are taking, so we'll just have to think through that, make sure you pace yourself, and make sure you're ready for this exam. Now there's two sections, and two sections only. But some of the AP exams come in a lot more sections with a lot more time constraints and everything. I don't think this test is that bad. So you have section 1, which you take first. You'll have the multiple choice. There's 40 questions in 90 minutes. So start time, you get the 40 questions, you go through them, you can use your calculator, do the best you can. That's 50% of your total AP score. Section 2 is the free response, and there's 6 questions in 90 minutes. Again, 50% of your score. But the free response is a little bit different. Okay? Now 6 questions in 90 minutes I think is manageable. Okay? You need to answer questions 1 through 5 for 75% of that section score, and then question 6 for 25% of your score of that section. Here's why. Questions 1 through 5 are definitely concept-based. You should be able to read the question, know what to do, make a plan, write the answer, move on. Right? There's nothing new or different about those questions. You've seen those, we've done them in class. Question 6, however, is an investigative task. And so the investigative task may involve something you already know how to do, and then it'll lead you through how to do something else. So you have to think a little bit more, you need more time on it. They're trying to see if you can apply the concepts from statistics and not just throw out a bunch of things you memorized. Okay? Now, for the section, there are no time cues. You have 90 minutes. They'll say start time, and they'll tell you when the time ends. There's not anything in between saying, you need to move on to question 2, or you need to move on to question 3. There aren't any time cues. So you need to spend about 65 minutes on questions 1 through 5. So that's about 12 minutes on each of the first 5 questions. But then the remaining 25 minutes should be spent on question 6. You need to invest time on that question because it's worth more. Even if you can only get a few parts of it right, at least you've gotten a few parts of it right. You do not want to get a 0 on question 6. Okay? So that's the basis of the test. 2 sections, 90 minutes, 90 minutes. There's a break in between, but straight through, straight through. Okay, then you're out of there. Depending on passing everything out and doing everything, it shouldn't take longer than 3.5 hours. Okay? All right. So let's talk about what's happening in Unit 1. That was chapters 2 through 6. Remember, chapter 1 was just our authors trying to be cute. So chapter 2 wasn't much. Chapter 2 was just talking about context. And at this point of the year, especially after doing all the hypothesis tests and all the intervals, you know better that if it's not in context, you're not getting full credit. So make sure that you include the context of the question. When you answer a question on a free response, you write it in a complete sentence and you answer it with the context of the question. Every single free response rubric at some point says, in the context of the question, in order to get it essentially correct. So make sure you're writing it in context. Chapter 3 was all about categorical variables. Remember, there's categorical variables and quantitative variables. Categorical variables are those that can be split up into categories. Quantitative is when you have data that's numerical, generally. Now, categorical variables we used a lot when we did proportions. So Z intervals and Z tests, that kind of thing. Okay? But if we're just talking about categorical variables in general, you should be able to make some graphical displays. On the free response, they generally make you make something or construct something. So you should be able to make a bar graph. Right? You have the labels at the bottom on the x-axis, and you build bars for frequency. You could make a pie chart. You have the circle, you have the wedges based on the percentages. You should be able to make a two-way table or read a two-way table. Right? That's when you have 2 categorical variables and you're fitting people into those categories. So You're a senior math major, you fit into this category. You're a junior arts major, you fit into this category. That's what a two-way table would be. And then probably the most important from this chapter is segmented bar graphs. I have seen these on the AP exam in recent years. Okay, so a segmented bar graph is where you found a percentage for each category and built upwards until all the bars were 100%. So let's say we're talking about college major and then college class, like as in freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Maybe I want to know freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, and I don't know the distribution of each of these. I don't know their majors. Well, they all add up to 100%, every single one. So all of these bars should end up being the same height. We'll say this is 100%. Then all of these bars are the same. Every bar will be the same. But then you put in the categories for their major. So maybe 25% were arts majors, and 25% were science majors, and 40% were business majors, and then 10% were doing some sort of, I don't know, writing or creative something. That kind of goes with arts, but you get the gist, okay? So you would do that for each individual class. You would find the percentage of that class that was involved. So all the bars would be 100% because you're showing every single category, okay? Again, you should be able to look back at all of this in your book and your notes and your old quizzes and things. So make sure you're looking back at this. But other than that, there's not much you can do with categorical variables. Chapter 4 and 5 both talked about quantitative variables, and we talked about what we could do with that. This is the big chunk of what's happening in Unit 1. Unit 1 and Unit 2 combined make up about 20% of the AP exam, and I would say of that 20%, a lot of it comes from Chapter 4 and 5. So, you should be able to make histograms by hand and in your calculator. That helps you check the shape of a distribution if you can make it in your calculator. You need to make box plots by hand and in your calculator. They make you make box plots in the AP exam rather frequently, or read box plots. They come up a lot, okay? So remember a box plot, you have the minimum value, you have Q1, you have the median value, you have Q3, and you have the maximum value, right? You can find all that information under one variable statistics in your calculator if you have all the data, or if they give you the data, you construct that. And the only thing else extra is the fences and outliers, right? If you want to know where the cutoff is, if there's an outlier or not, sometimes they give them to you and sometimes they don't. So you need to know it's Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR, and it's Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. That's important information. And then dot plots, that's just a frequency, right, but with quantitative variables. So we keep a frequency. We have this many of this percent, or this many of this percent. Once you've made some sort of display, you should be able to describe a distribution. If they say on the AP exam to describe a distribution, that means that you need to talk about shape, center, and spread. That's what that means. It's not optional. They're not going to tell you to talk about the shape, center, and spread. They're going to say describe. That's what you should talk about. So, remember shape? Is the distribution skewed or symmetric? Is it unimodal, bimodal, or uniform? Right? So if we think about some shapes, obviously we know what symmetric looks like. That's pretty, right? That's unimodal and symmetric. If it's skewed, this is skewed to the left. It's always skewed to the tail, right? So this would be skewed to the right, okay? Is it bimodal? Now be careful, because some of you guys got this confused back in Unit 1. If you have a histogram and there's just a bar that happens to be taller, this is not bimodal because there's two bars that are taller than the rest. Okay? Bimodal means there's two different clusters of information. So bimodal means you have a cluster here, maybe there's a gap or something, and you have another cluster here. That's bimodal. Okay? So be careful about that. Then uniform just meant that everything was about the same. Nothing too exciting happening. Okay? That's a shape. Now, for center and spread, we talk about different things with different shapes. So if you have a unimodal and symmetric distribution, you talk about the mean and the standard deviation. If you have a skewed distribution or some weird distribution, you talk about the median and IQR. And you always report all of these in context. They're going to ask you to describe the distribution. This is what you should be talking about. When I go over your exam, then you'll see where all this came into play. Also in chapter 4 and 5, what happens when you're shifting and rescaling data? If you're shifting data, it means you're adding or subtracting. So they're going to say, oh, we're going to add 7 to every single data point. And they're going to ask you what happens to the mean and standard deviation, or the median and IQR. Well, so if you're shifting, then you only change the median and the mean. Right? If you're shifting something, that means you're moving it up or down the number line, so the shape stays the exact same, so it means the spread doesn't change, but the center does. So if you're adding or subtracting, you only change the mean and the median. If you're rescaling, multiplying or dividing data, then you change the mean or the median, depending on what you're talking about, and the standard deviation or IQR, depending on what you're talking about. Because if you're multiplying or dividing, you're changing the shape. So you're changing the center, and then you're changing how spread apart it is. The last chapter is chapter 6, the normal distribution. We have used the normal distribution in excess this semester. Right? We know what to do. But just in case. Are you trying to compare two unlike things? Then you need to compare z-scores. Back in the book, we compared like a long jumper with a pole vaulter or something. We wanted to see who did better in the decathlon. And they did about the same in all the other events except for those two. And so we had to compare those two unlike things. So we find z-scores. Remember, we did this when we did a z-score in our hypothesis test too. You have a statistic minus a parameter over the standard deviation. So in this case, the statistic is going to be your personal score on a test or the pole vault or whatever, minus the mean score divided by the standard deviation that they give you. All right, then you can see how many standard deviations you are away from the mean and who's farther away from the mean. That's more unusual. That's how you compare two unlike things. That was all over the Unit 1 test. Are you trying to find a probability? Then you use normal CDF. You guys are pretty good at that. Make sure on a free response question you draw a picture. You need to draw the model. If you write normal CDF, they don't care. Draw the picture shaded in. It doesn't take very long. And then 3, are you trying to find a specific percentile? Use inverse norm. You're trying to find the 85th percentile, the 75th percentile. Then you type in 0.75 or 0.85 or whatever, and it gives you the cut scores. Okay? So that's what inverse norm is used for. We've come back to that a few times. That's, in general, what's happening in Unit 1. There's a lot of details, a lot of things going on. So that's why I'm providing you with lots of review materials. You need to go through and look through those and try them out and practice. Okay? This is not just going to come to you. But it's a good reminder just to have something, oh, what's really going on in that unit, okay?